Little message up there says we're live.
You're good.
We are. Okay. Hi, everybody. It's 6:31 p.m. The May 4, 2021 meeting of the Southborough Board of Selectmen. All members of the board are present, and bear with me while I read the governor's intro. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Southborough Board of Selectmen will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information in the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording transcript or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. So again, with that, I will call the meeting to order. And without further ado, first item on the agenda is public comment. And I do not see any, oh, wait a minute. I do not see any hands raised. Going once, twice, three. Next is scheduled appointments. And the first one is Karen Wheeler, discussion of a proposed energy/sustainability committee. Ms. Wheeler is in the attendees. So if we could bring her over for our discussion. Hello, Karen, how are you?
I'm good. How are you all?
I think well. I'm well. Thank you. So you and I think maybe with some other members of the board, have had some discussions about this. So why don't you tell us what you've been thinking about, and what, if anything, you might want us to do or think about or take action on. Fair enough?
Okay. I actually had prepared just a very brief PowerPoint. I don't know if you got that. I had sent it over to.
I can share my screen. I have those slides if you want, Ms. Wheeler.
Yeah, I can. Can I share my screen?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Katie, does she have access, Ms. Wheeler, to share her screen? Do you see that green button at the bottom?
Yeah, maybe I don't. It says host disabled participants.
Okay, we're going to fix that in 1 second.
Yeah, just made her a co-host, so she should be able to now. So.
Okay, let's see. All right. Okay, so can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I'm here to propose to the Board of Selectmen the establishment of an Energy and Sustainability Committee. And I'm just going to go through a little bit of background to frame this conversation. And, it starts sort of at the high level, which is, the federal, state and local government level. A lot of people are starting to talk about climate emergency. Many institutions, particularly scientific and government institutions, are using this language now. We have a President Biden in office who has been talking a lot about his climate agenda. He's the first president to appoint a climate czar, and John Kerry. And he has pledged to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, which would be a manageable increase to move forward in our planet more or less as we know it today. He has pledged to target emissions reductions by 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. He's also talking about infrastructure investment legislation that would include significant funding for renewable energy. One step down from that is in our own state with Government Baker. There was climate legislation passed in 2021, whereby he has targeted net zero emissions for our state by 2050. And Massachusetts is also one of 13 states in the Transportation and Climate Initiative program, which pledges to develop programs to reduce energy in the transportation sector. And many surrounding towns have committees. I've been in conversation with folks from Wayland, Sudbury, Framingham, and Stowe. And these committees have been viewed by the town as very successful because they've worked to save the town money and move the town toward sustainability. Southborough, Mark Purple, I think I saw Mark Purple on this call. I've had a few conversations with John Parent, our town's energy manager in the facilities department, and he's done a great job with the Mass Green Communities grants. I think we joined the program in 2017, and he has managed to get 4 grants since that time, totaling about $850,000. And those have gone primarily to funding energy conservation and weatherization in town buildings. I also recently discovered that, and perhaps you're aware of this, Southborough School, there's a Southborough School Properties Solar Committee. And I've been in touch with Superintendent Martineau to volunteer on the committee. Keith Lavoie, from what I understand, Keith Lavoie is managing this committee, and he is in the process of reconvening. My correspondence with Superintendent Martineau has been limited, and because I think it's just they're just starting to get this running again, and he said he would be back in touch. So I don't have a lot of information there. And just a little bit background about me, because I know a couple of you through, our kids being in school together, but, other than that, I don't think we are acquainted in any professional respect. Generally speaking, I'm concerned about our planet. I'm concerned about the cost to humanity if we don't get the increasing climate under control. And I'm passionate about carbon neutrality because I do think it's manageable. I think we have the power, at multiple levels throughout the world to address this. My professional experience has been in finance and process management for, a long time in both the corporate and not-for-profit sector. I currently work at a nonprofit organization called Second Nature, and their mission is accelerating carbon reduction in the higher education sector. But I will admit I'm not a technology expert. I work more in the finance and operations area, although I'm exposed to it a lot. And I'm committed to putting in the time and energy to foster an effective committee in Southborough. So the committee purpose, and I've put this together based upon what other towns are doing. The primary purpose of the committee is to research, advise, and advocate sustainability solutions with the Board of Selectmen, other town committees, and residents in the areas of energy conservation, HVAC, renewable technologies for buildings and equipment, electric vehicles and determining and soliciting the funding that would allow the town to engage in these projects. And the second component of the committee would be to engage residents in home sustainability awareness and opportunities that they could individually implement in their homes. Solar panels, heat pumps are coming down the road, composting, and electric vehicles. And overriding all of this is, the intention, one of the major intentions of such a committee is to save the town money on its energy bills. Some additional considerations. I think the committee would work closely with the town's energy manager around sharing knowledge, develop strategy, and integrate and support projects. I would fully expect that the energy manager would continue with the green communities work that he has been doing in his department. And I think the timing is right to establish a committee at this point, because I think that there are going to be a lot of government funding incentives that we'll want to take advantage of that will be coming down the road with the Massachusetts and the federal legislation. One possibility that I talked to Marty and Brian about previously was the possibility of, instead of establishing a new committee, would be to resurrect the Green Technology and Recycling Committee. And that committee, I think, operated for a few years ago. And I think Carl Geyer I don't know if any of you know Carl Geyer, but I think he was chairing that committee at the time. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure why that committee ceased to actively operate. And the one other consideration is, I think that there's going to be a growing climate concern from the residents in our community. And so that I would, hope that they would be motivated to join such a committee, so that it wouldn't be a struggle to find members to staff the committee. And I've drafted, a committee charge, and I'll read it. And this is just it's a draft. I'm, certainly would, welcome any additional insight that any of you would have. So it reads, the Energy and Sustainability Committee is charged with assisting the Board of Selectmen and Town Administrator in developing programs and projects to foster energy conservation, energy efficiency, renewable energy generation, and sustainability planning. This committee will gather, study, and evaluate information that will help determine various approaches for improving the energy efficiency of operating town and school buildings and vehicles, investigate alternative energy technologies, and identify funding opportunities to help the town achieve its energy and sustainability related goals. And secondly, build sustainability awareness and action among town residents through educational programming. I just thought that this statement might, be fodder for discussion. So that is all I've prepared, but I'm happy to hear, questions, concerns, any thoughts on next steps. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay, Karen, thanks very much. And that touched and covered a lot of the questions that I would have had. I'm just going to ask a couple, then I'm going to go to start going around. I'll start with Ms. Braccio. The first is, I'll start with the last slide. did you borrow, you mentioned Wayland, Sudbury, Framingham, and Stowe. Did you, in putting together that statement, did you look at their committee charters? Okay.
I did.
I assumed you had? Okay.
Yeah, I did. And that's one of the, one of the good things about establishing a committee is this, it's not new. This has been done in a lot of other towns. So, and people are very happy to, speak to newcomers in this area, so that it's not like, it's not recreating the wheel. You can go talk to people and, really hit the ground running.
Okay. And the next, you mentioned you've had discussions with Mr. Parent about this?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm just curious as to what his reaction was.
He's actually, he was initially a little concerned about, infringing upon his green communities work. And that is not the intention of this committee. I think the work that John is doing with the green communities is very constructive, has been very helpful to the town, and I think he can continue to do that. And what this committee is, the intention of this committee is to do really larger projects that are more complex and need more thinking and more support and greater funding than the Green Communities grants provides. And so John, once John understood that, I think he was very supportive. Okay,
I'll stop talking, except to say very quickly, as I said to you in our conversations, number one, I think it's a great idea. I'm always very much in favor of people volunteering their time, particularly when one of the slides says save the town money. That always gets my ears perking. And in terms of next steps, aside from going around and seeing what other folks might think about next steps, is we would do some due diligence, for instance, touching base with Mr. Parent, taking a look at some of the other stuff with the towns and the like. So with that, I'm going to go over to Ms. Braccio.
Great, thank you, Marty. John Parent is in the audience. I don't know if you want to bring him in before we ask questions or maybe after. I'm sure that'd be one of the questions.
Okay, Jay Parent, I see it now. Why don't we bring Mr. Parent over? Okay, might make things more efficient. Sure.
Thank
Where'd he go? Hey, John, you thought you could hide by not putting your full name out there, huh? Didn't work. You can't get past Ms. Braccio. All right. Thanks. Go ahead, Lisa.
Great. No, John, I wanted you to be here to answer questions. And I think maybe at the end, it would be, important for me anyway, to hear your thoughts on this as well. So first, Ms. Wheeler, thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you so much for stepping forward. It's always exciting when somebody that maybe hasn't volunteered does bring an idea forward. I just had a couple questions. One was obviously you answered regarding Mr. Parent, and if he agrees with the direction that you're going with this committee. And John, I guess you can probably answer that.
The only problem I have with the committee, the way it's being presented right now, it looks like, looking at the slide presentation, when you go to committee purpose, it's really getting into a lot of things that are within the facilities. And these are areas where I work closely with Brian Fantoni over on the school side operations. We work with National Grid project expediters. We have Sean McGloin, who's a National Grid energy efficiency expert. And basically there's teams of engineers and installers who we have very close relationships with outside of Jane Pfister and Kelly Brown at DOER as well. And the way we do things right now, we are on a lot of deadlines and time schedules. And when you start throwing a committee into this mix, we can start missing timelines and schedules. And that ends up being lost funds. And we really have a good handle on what's going on within the buildings. Now, where I do see some great purpose here, as I spoke with Mrs. Wheeler back in March, the residential part, that's where I could use some help, actually. We could really use a representative on the resident side of things to explain basically how you can make your life more green in the town. And when I had spoke to Mrs. Wheeler about the solar committee over at the schools, I mentioned what we could probably get her on. It would be a good place. And I'm glad she's reached out to Superintendent Martineau. I think that's an excellent place to start with this. I think she'd be a valuable person as a citizen voice whenever we're doing a large project. But right now, when we do large projects, those would go before capital planning. I know Mrs. Wheeler has mentioned that she'd like to be the voice, but in all reality, from a town's perspective, when we want to move forward with a large project, we're going to go to advisory, capital planning, and then present to the Board of Selectmen. Right now, capital planning serves as my voice if I need assistance. And I'm sure all of you have known me well enough to know, shyness is not my issue. I'm very good at representing myself. And if I do need help, I turn to capital planning. So that's one spot we're not weak in right now. I really don't need the assistance there. I need the residential portion. And I am looking at the presentation, and I like the idea of reinitiating the Green Technology and Recycling Committee more than creating this new committee. Because I think that's the type of committee town residents they relate to. They know it, they know the name, it served a great purpose, and I think there could be some benefit to the town in that. And I think Mrs. Wheeler's passion for this is quite remarkable. We've had some great conversations. I think one of them went over an hour one day, Karen, actually. And right now, we've already done weatherization. The school lighting project's coming out phenomenal. We're getting ready to go to our first hybrid vehicle, the police department. Already looking at a 1200 amp service for DC charges over at the PD. The town's making some big progress in regards to going green. So we really have a good grasp on that. But again, when we're going to do a large project, if we need someone to step on from a citizen's perspective, Mrs. Wheeler would be someone I'd say, yeah, she's up there with Carl. Her passion for this is very legitimate. And I would say if we're going to go the way of any sort of committee, it would be more towards the Green Technology and Recycling Committee again, is the way I would say would work best for me. That way we can still do what we're doing on the town side. We can work with her on her side, and we can lean on each other when we need each other's help. And I think that would be a very beneficial thing to the town from that perspective.
All right, thank you, John. And actually that answered a few of the questions that I had. One of my concerns was redundancy in having the capital committee. And I know capital has been talking about some of the electric cars and having those discussions as well. So I just worried a little bit about redundancy. And I also agree. I think the biggest thing I saw in your presentation, and again, Karen, I commend you for this, for stepping forward, is I think engaging the residents. And I think that's where we tend to kind of fall behind the 8 ball, even for recycling. I know there's always people that have questions that I see online all the time. And it would be great to have a committee that people could tune into, that if people had a question on what do you think might be the best way that I could change my energy footprint. And I think having a committee, now I wouldn't say solely focused, but mainly focused on being a benefit to the residents, because I think that's where the largest impact can be. But still being somewhat involved in, some of the other things that we're doing in town as well. So again, I think it's a great idea. I think I would like to see focus on the residential side, but also, Karen, I might recommend you have a conversation with the capital committee as well. I think that would be very useful. And again, continue on this path. Don't take anything that you may hear today as a defeat in any way. It's just another step in getting something going and working towards making Southborough a better place for us all. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Karen, Chelsea, before I go to you, Karen, just a quick sort of reaction to particularly John parents' proposal and followed up on by Lisa about focusing on the residential side of things. In terms of your thinking about this, what percentage of what you sort of envisioned would fall under that portion of the umbrella?
Yeah, I'm off the top of my head, maybe 30%.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my response is, I don't, it's hard for me to understand exactly what's being done in the town, and I haven't, spoken to the capital planning committee or the capital committee, and I'm just concerned that Southborough, with the positions and structures that it currently has in place, has the bandwidth to really take on, larger, more complex projects. And maybe it does. I definitely don't want to create redundancy. That's just not, I mean, it's just, total waste of time. And what I'm, really interested in is, Southborough becoming, taking rapid steps towards carbon neutrality. And, if that's done by, other departments and these people and structures that are in place, I think that's great. It's just not clear to me. And
Karen, that's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Again, that's why we're going through this process and why there's a little bit of back and forth to get, because and there's no reason you would know how all of these other parts fit together right now, but we're also trying to get an understanding for how you see the committee you've got in your mind, how it would fit together. So that's I'm going to go to Ms. Malinowski now, but no, your instincts are absolutely right on this. It's like, all right, where can we cut out redundancy? Where does it fit? And Ms. Braccio makes a terrific point, and that is incorporating discussions with capital planning. And maybe they have ideas about how to enhance even the concepts you've got right now. So Ms. Malinowski?
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Wheeler, for your presentation. So I think I just have a few comments. I don't know that I have any more questions. I think you and John kind of clarified what I had. One is, I love the idea of the resident engagement. I think we're seeing this across the board in multiple areas in town where we're lacking in our outreach to people. Like kind of what you just said is, you're not exactly sure what capital planning does and how that kind of works with what John Parent is doing in terms of his day-to-day operations. And when he needs something, how does that all play together? And I think that you could, with your interest in this area, you could help us let people know what's going on in town and do that outreach, to let people know how they can help, how they can improve on their own lives, and kind of what the town is doing to make improvements. So I really like that idea. The other piece that I had, and I don't know, I forget which slide it was on, but you were talking about the grant opportunities that are coming up too, especially with the change in government. And I think, if this committee was interested in following what's going on and giving either capital planning or John ideas on what's coming up, what could Southborough capitalize on, and kind of do some of that legwork, I think that would be helpful too, because I know there's a lot of grant opportunities coming up and kind of across all pieces of town government. And if we could kind of channel in on, you have this idea and, John, is this something that we could go after and kind of be that sounding board for him? And in conjunction with capital planning, I think that might be helpful too. So thank you for your presentation.
All right, I'm going to go to Mr. Shea.
Okay. Karen, thank you. I think the presentation tonight was very well done, very neatly summarizes, I think, all the points in discussion that we had back at the office hours. I think it was maybe 2 months ago or so, where you joined Marty and I to first discuss this with us anyway. So very good job with the presentation. Just curious with the, you said you had looked at Wayland, Sudbury, Stowe, Framingham. Does each of those communities have the residential component of it as well? Or is that something that, you saw from one of the communities that others may not have had?
Yeah, Stowe definitely has that. I don't think Framingham does. And I think Sudbury does. I'm not sure about Wayland.
Yeah. And again, just kind of adding on to what Ms. Malinowski was saying, I think we've seen a lot of outreach or proposed outreach from the Municipal Technology Committee as well towards residents. And I think that that's a good trend, I think, to have, boards and committees engaging with the residents. I completely agree with that. The one thing I would note, and I like the draft charge they have written. I like the way that it is written. And a concern I would have if Green Technology and Recycling Committee were to be reinstituted. Thinking recycling, I think right away a lot of people are going to think transfer station. And I think we run the risk of overlap between this committee and the Public Works Planning Board as well. So just to, if we do go down that route, I think that we'll just need to be able to differentiate, roles and responsibilities with respect to the transfer station with Public Works Planning Board and this committee as well. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Brian. And Mr. Stivers.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Wheeler. Good presentation. And I certainly support the concept. And I think that where I am struggling a little bit is in terms of how we actually put the structure in place to make meaningful progress on this. I guess I am concerned about creating another committee, which we always seem to have difficulty getting volunteers for committees. I guess I lean toward reconstituting the Green and Recycling Committee as a vehicle for that. Also, from a standpoint of funding, you talk about larger projects, and I think to follow on Chelsea's point, I think there's some significant grant money out there for a variety of things over the next few years. But I do think it's going to be a real struggle to find town funding for significant projects because we annually go through a real struggle to find $1,000 here, $2,000 there kind of numbers. So, and there are some big asks in the pipeline in terms of the capital planning process and capital committee. So I think that's a challenge that would be very helpful to sort out. And finally, it seems to me that my impression is, and I haven't had a lot of conversation with John Parent about this specifically, is our facilities folks have been doing a good job and spending a lot of effort in the direction of energy efficiency and I guess tangentially at least carbon footprint. And so it seems to me that there is relatively more opportunity in terms of the resident engagement and participation and what can I or others as an individual resident do to have an impact on this as well. And I think that we haven't done much of that historically. And I think that would be, for me at least, an important aspect. So I would, I guess, think about shifting the focus to more like 80% resident and 20% quotes advising, working with, identifying opportunities for the town's facilities operation to make progress there as well. So again, I've not had the benefit of the conversations that apparently some of my colleagues have had here with you about it. So I'm sort of coming from a standing start on this thing. I did review the presentation, but again, worthy idea, and I think we should certainly explore further how we can make it happen. Thank you.
And Karen, I'm probably going to have the last or close to the last word on this. I think, as I conveyed when you, Brian, and I spoke at office hours, I guess I'll rattle through my list. I think it's whatever the name of it is called. Again, I'm a little concerned about the recycling for some of the reasons that have been raised, that it harkens back to the transfer station, and obviously your concept is very different than that. That's number one. Number two, I suspect, and I know I'm not wrong about this. I suspect that, as Mr. Stivers said, there can be problems getting folks for committees. I don't think this is a committee that we'd have trouble getting people to be involved with. I mean, it's not on everybody's mind, but it's on a lot of people's minds about how all of us and particularly how the town can do things better. So And I guess finally, very quickly, I'm not going to be putting together agendas anymore. So mostly people think that's good, but anyway, it'll fall to somebody else. That being said, I think that due diligence is going to be, undertaken here. I'm going to dive into and take a look at some of these other towns and what they're doing, and that'll educate. And I guess this is a long way of saying we'll be back to you. I want to touch base with Mr. Perrin a little bit more. I want to take a look at, and I suspect others do as well, what some of the other towns are doing. I want to think about it a little bit. But if we don't have a committee like this tomorrow, we're going to have one in a year or in 2 years, or if we don't have one, we're going to wish we had something like this, because these are issues that are not going away. And it's not just about getting money from the federal government and otherwise, but it's thinking about things. And we're doing a pretty good job of that, but thinking about things differently. And clearly you've got both a passion and a background that would greatly enhance that. So sorry to proselytize a little bit, but I think that's where we are. That's where we're going to leave. And hopefully that's a hopeful way to leave. And as I said, we'll be back to you after we all have a chance to think about it a little bit and do some due diligence. Fair enough?
Yeah, that's great. So just a question for you. So you suggest I speak to somebody on the capital committee. Are there others in town that you would suggest I speak to, just to educate myself around, how this might fit or not fit?
You know what? I would start. This is my suggestion. I would start with John. Because I can think off the top of my head that obviously capital planning, you might want to touch base with advisory and see how you'd interface with them. You probably want to touch base with for instance, some of the large carbon users in town. But again, I don't want to put this all on your plate, but for instance, fire, police, DPW. But I would start with Mr. Parent, and I think the first stops that he would take you to would be capital planning and advisory. And in the meantime, we'll be doing some additional thinking about and researching on our own. And again, once we get past town meeting, we're going to be having office hours again. And so drop in and, tell us what you've learned. We'll tell you what's going on with work we're doing. And, again, I think this is a good idea. How to shape it is going to be it's a challenge, but it's a challenge that we can deal with. But let's not lose momentum for the idea, because I think it's a very good idea.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing me out tonight.
All right. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Karen, thanks very much. John, we're going to let you leave for now.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Yep,
Okay.
have a good night.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
I am told that that there is no one from ZBA to talk about town meeting warrant article number 34. So I don't think we have to move to table that. I'm just going to table that unless I see a hand raised very quickly in the attendee gallery, and I do not. So we're going to move on to Mr. Linden, if he is available. If he is, he's operating under a pseudonym. So maybe we're going to table that one as well, maybe till later, or
Marty?
meeting. Did we hear? But he was in the Mr. Linden was in the moderator's meeting.
He's in the moderator's meeting. He got what he needed there, and I think he's going to move forward. But he understands the process now that I think there was a little bit of uncertainty about.
Okay, so your understanding, Sam, is that he's not going to be joining us.
He didn't say he would or wouldn't, but he seemed to get his questions answered at the moderator's meeting, as far as I know.
All right, we'll table that one then. I do see Chief Paulus, and so why don't we bring him over for item 3D?
Marty, also, there was a note in the chat from Katie that she's happy to talk about the ZBA article briefly, if you want her to.
Okay, let me see. Chief, can you give us, we'll leave you here, but can you give us 5 minutes or so just to chat really quickly? We're not going to send you back and forth about a prior item. Fair enough?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Katie, where are you? There you are.
Right here. Hi. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions about the article. I worked really closely with the chair last year to write this up, and it's pretty much administrative. It kind of fixes a little issue in the non-conforming part of our zoning articles. So basically it gives a homeowner with a non-conforming lot or structure more rights, so they don't have to come to the ZBA if they're doing a one-for-one replacement. If they have a deck that is maybe encroaching on a side setback, they can replace it if they need to. Say it's rotting, they can replace that in the exact same footprint without having to come to the ZBA. So it kind of saves them money and the process, and they're really not enlarging any of the nonconformity. So if they were to say go a little bit further into a setback or go higher than they need, they would still need to come to the zoning board. But if it's a one-for-one replacement, they don't have to.
Do you know, Katie, whether in putting this together, the ZBA solicited or received public comment? Do you know one way or the other?
I know that we didn't in any of our meetings, and I don't think the planning board did either. It's straightforward and simple. This came up, I think, we've had a lot of issues with these two codes in the code. And it's just to fix that, because we've had Aldo actually have to work with us on some of these as well, whereas if this goes through, everybody wins.
Okay.
Marty? Marty?
Was that you, Sam?
Yeah, can I quick comment if I may?
Sure.
I think it's my understanding the intent of this is to align our bylaw with case law on this issue now. So the courts have opined about these things. This is one of the many places in the state zoning law that our law models that is murky at its original drafting point, and has created a large number of legal cases that have somewhat clarified the process. And I think the goal here is to get aligned with what the courts have said about these issues. So I guess I think the view is it's largely administrative here, effectively.
All right, I'm going to go from back to front. Brian, do you have anything you want to weigh in on?
Nothing further. My understanding was, as Katie had explained, and Sam's explanation as well.
Okay, Chelsea?
Yes, it makes sense to me. Thank you.
And Lisa?
Just to say thank you, Katie, for being so efficient. We appreciate it.
Yeah, how many different hats do you wear, Katie?
A lot.
Can you handle Chief Policy's end of things? Because we'd much rather talk with you than him.
Happy to.
How you doing, Chief?
Mr. Chairman, before we move on to the chief and that, do you this is still listed as at town meeting for a selectman recommendation. I'm not sure if you want to take a recommendation on this tonight or not.
You know, based on what Katie said, I'd like to take a look, another look at it, and particularly since when we loop back to discussion under reports about the upcoming meeting schedule, it looks like we're going to have hopefully a relatively modest meeting on May 10th. He says, haha. But we can, that'll just give me, based on what Katie said, what Sam said, I'd like to loop back so I'm a little bit better informed about exactly what it's doing. Seems straightforward, but we don't need to do it tonight. All right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Chief.
Good evening, everybody.
Policy on traffic constables. Why do we need it? What does it do?
Oh, I don't know if anybody's driven around town, but we have a little bit of road construction going on. Just the 3 Mass Pike bridges are 9 offices a day. Right now, we're filling anywhere from 14 to over 20 details a day. It's been the trend for several years now. We've reached out to all our partners in the area, and usually what will happen is we'll call them to look for detail offices, and they'll ask us the same question. Do you have any that can come over and work in our town? So it's a bit of a burden. So we kind of did some research, and the towns of Framingham and Hopkinton have this traffic constable policy that they've been using for a number of years. So we thought it would be prudent to investigate that. My plan right now is to possibly just keep it within the public safety building for our dispatch personnel and possibly the fire personnel. I checked with Chief Achilles. He put it out to his group, and there is definitely some interest. I also think it would be something good to try and attract and retain dispatchers, especially part-time dispatchers. I know that we had one that went over to Hopkinton, and one of the reasons she said was because they allow the dispatchers to get on their traffic detail list. My goal is just to expand the pool a little bit and have some more partners locally that we can go to. So I'll leave it to you. You've read the policy. If you have any questions, then I'm ready to answer them.
So I've just, so on day one, what happens under the policy? In other words, assume that the policy is adopted. What happens, what changes on day one in terms of the way you're dealing with the traffic issues now?
Well, my preference is to still have sworn police officers maintain the details. In circumstances like this, where we get behind, they come in last minute, is to go to this secondary list where we would have the traffic constables eligible to fill in.
Okay, and you would go about filling the roster by first making it available, again, as you said, within the public safety building?
Yes, if we go to the constables list, that's all I want to expand it right now is to personnel in the public safety building.
Okay.
So dispatches and fire personnel.
Okay, all right. I'll go first to you, Ms. Malinowski.
Thanks, Chief. Is there any special training that they have to go through to do this?
Yeah, there is 8 hours that they'll have to spend with an officer in the road. That'll be on their own time. So we can give them some training on traffic control. It does make mention in the policy of attending a traffic control class. I'll have to do some more research on that to see if that's needed or not.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Shea.
So I think you'd indicated that the preference would be to fill details with officers first and then have the constables available if that does not fall through, correct? Or if they're not available, rather? Okay.
Yes.
And, you know, I think I support that, and just curious if there's any language that, you know, from the current contract that comes into play here. And hopefully we don't create a situation where a complaint comes in because of the use of constables versus details as well. But it sounds as though by going to the officers first, that would preclude that.
Yeah, that's already spelled out clearly in the union contract. It goes to the unionized officers first, then it goes to other uniformed personnel in the building. Then we put it out to our reserves and specials, and then we go out of town. Something also to consider in this with the new police reform bill, reserves and specials are going to have their training hours equal to a full-time member. So it's probably going to be 800 to 900 hours that a new reserve or special has to accomplish in order to get certified. And then also we only have 2 left. Our current specials are going to have to make up those hours in training. So I anticipate that the pool of special officers is going to be greatly reduced in the coming years.
Okay. Thank you. No other questions.
All right, thanks, Brian. Mr. Stivers.
Thank you. Thanks, Chief. Sounds like a useful idea. A question in terms of process. It sounds like that in terms of filling these positions, you do go through your current list of candidates for details, then you would go to other towns before you actually got to the constables, or would you go to the constables before you go to other towns for sworn officers?
Right now, my preference is to have the sworn police officers work the details. That's always subject to change. I just like to get the program off the ground, see how it works, and then we could adjust from there.
Yeah, but you're not required to go to other towns before you come back to the constables, is that accurate?
We would not be. That would be my preference for right now. Like I said, that can be discussed. I just want to get the program going. We'll see how it works out and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Any difference in economics for this? Do the constables get billed for, paid for at the same rates as sworn officers for these duties?
Yeah, it's all according to union contract, whether they're in town, out of town, reserves, specials, it all gets billed at the union contract rate, and the town gets 10%.
So, and the constables would be paid at the same rate as a sworn officer?
That's correct.
Okay, so again, my concern would be if there was an issue relative to the union saying this is somehow less expensive labor that we were substituting. So good that there's consistency there. So thank you.
I've already vetted it through the police officers union as well. And I didn't hear any objection. In fact, they're very aware of the fact that we're having problems filling the multitude of jobs that are coming in.
Okay, thanks. The fallback, of course, is the Board of Selectmen as constables, but we won't go there. So that does it for me. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sam. Lisa.
Hi, Chief. Good evening. Thank you for coming. My questions have been answered. I think this is a great program, and I think it's a great opportunity. And as summer comes, we all know things get busier. So I commend you for moving forward with this sooner rather than later before you find yourself behind the 8 ball. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chief, one final thing from me, looking at the policy, does this mean that at some point in the relatively near future, under policy section B, that you are going to be coming to us with a, sounds like a pretty small roster of recommendations for people to be designated as being members of the traffic constable pool?
That's correct. You'll see in there that they'll be subject to a physical, a sign off from a doctor according to the policy. It says May 1st in the policy. We'll have to skip that out probably maybe even up to 4 weeks. And there is a quick background check that we'll do. Shouldn't be an extensive background check, especially if people are already in the public safety building. So once we vet that list, certainly in the next meeting or two, we'd be bringing it forward, especially in the coming month or two. These details are just going to increase by the day.
I'm just I'm looking for the May 1st reference, Chief. Oh, no, I see it.
Okay. This is just a draft policy, so I might have to amend some dates on it, but this is pretty much it.
So if this is a draft policy, then you're other than reading the room, it seems like there's support for the approach you're taking. You're going to come to us then with a final policy relatively quickly.
Oh yes, I can have it done in the next couple of days and send it over.
All right. Well, we've got a meeting May 10th. It looks that way anyway. So if you could have it here quickly, we can put it on and get it approved for you.
All right. That sounds great.
All right. I'm not misreading people's reaction to it, correct? No. Okay. All right. Chief, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Have a great night.
All right. You too. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Bye now.
All right. That takes care of 3. I've mentioned it a couple of times, going to reports, chairman's report. And basically, I'm talking about 2 upcoming meetings. The first one, we talked about this, I think it was at our last meeting, might have been 2 meetings ago, about the possibility, given that there are RFPs on the South Union out there, there's an RFP on the legal out there. I was also reached out to by advisory to have an additional joint discussion to try to bring harmony to the ongoing review of Board of Health budget numbers. So I think it makes sense to have a May 10th meeting. Since Mr. Shea turns into a pumpkin at midnight on May 10th, at least we have that limit on how long the meeting can go. So that's number 1. And number 2 is just to, notwithstanding the fact that there'll be a May 10 meeting, the next regularly scheduled meeting after that will be May 18. I don't know what's going to be on the agenda for that, but it'll be after the May 11 election, and it'll be, number one, a new board. At least 1/5 of the board will be new, and that'll be our reorganization meeting as well. I know the schedule for that got jumbled up last year because of late election, late town meeting, et cetera, but even though it's kind of a little bit odd this year because it's the May 18th meeting is 4 days before town meeting, I still think it makes sense to adhere to the normal scheduling and do our regular reorganization meeting on May 18th. Unless I see heads going like this, which I don't. All right, that'll be the plan then. Okay, that's all I've got on meeting scheduling. So we can go to members' reports. And is this Chelsea or Lisa on the rent and mortgage assistance program, or both?
Okay.
All right, Chelsea, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to give the board an update that I've received for applications so far for the rent and mortgage program. If you remember, probably about a month ago, the trust approved another $25,000 to be used out of CARES funds and backstopped by the housing trust. And so that application review process is underway. 2 checks have been cut, 2 are in review, and the new process is working well. And I would just encourage anybody listening tonight or to this tape that if you know of anybody who has had a loss of income due to COVID, that they go to the town website and look to see if they would qualify for this program. Thank you.
All right, great, thanks.
Marty?
Lisa, well, hold on a second, Sam. Lisa, I know you were very involved in this as well. Anything to add, or?
No, Chelsea's just done a great job of moving this forward. So thank
No,
you,
that's
Chelsea.
absolutely true. Yes, Sam.
One quick comment, if I could. Not for discussion, but I'd ask that we get this on an agenda at some point as quickly as possible. I continue to follow the federal stimulus programs, and between the 3 programs that are now rolling along, one's enacted and 2 are in the pipeline, there's $6 trillion with a T that's going to float out there for a variety, a wide range of opportunities. And I think there's interesting points relative to that for things that we might be able to have access to. And I would urge us to have a discussion around a plan for what we're going to do with that, how we make sure we take full advantage of those funds, as well as other potential funding sources as we think about projects that need to be done over the next several years here. So it seems to me that's worthy for discussion near-term meeting, and I would ask that be on the agenda.
I agree, and I will raise that with the next chair of the Board of Selectmen.
I thought you were chairman for life. Wait a minute, you and Chairman Mao.
Right. Yeah. I would be if I continued. It would shorten it dramatically.
He's managed to increase his span for 30 years now. So,
all right, Mr. Purple, with I think a pretty detailed update, including news on the grant that is, at least part of it is coming our way through our efforts, but also very much so through the town of Northborough's efforts, right?
Correct. So yes, I had listed on the agenda simply the vaccination update, which has kind of been a standing item, but there are some other updates on a couple of things. Quickly regarding the COVID-19 vaccination update, we continue to operate the regional vaccination clinic in Westborough. Things have been going very well, and again, can't give enough kudos to Kristen Black, the health agent in Northborough, who's been spearheading this effort. And she has, organized a team, which includes, our health director, Chief Achilles, also our MRC, our CERT members, who've been helping out up there. It's been a tremendous success. It just really would have been great if we could have had this maybe in February, and I think we would have gotten a lot more impact. But we are seeing a lot of appointments. They were able to get a full tray of Pfizer. You may have seen we've been trying to broadly push this out through the 7 communities. A full tray of Pfizer, which is being dedicated to the high school students in the area, and we're trying to broaden this out now as far as we can for a special vaccination day on May 8th. And to try to, because Pfizer obviously is the only one vaccine available for people under 18 at this point. And so they're trying to do that. It's been a little bit slow. We're seeing a lot of available appointments. I appreciate those of you I've reached out to who have helped to try to push this out, to Miss Hale and Miss Berry that have been pushing this out on social media, and everybody else who has tried to get this out to make sure that we're getting people vaccinated. I did put some information in the packet that was shared at one of these regional meetings, and Dr. Alker also has looked at this as well. But about 61% of our total residents have at least one dose of vaccine, which I think is great. And it compares well with the other communities. I think that we're trending better than the other communities in terms of a lot of our younger populations. But all of the senior population, 75 and older, in the 7 participating communities, you're looking at, northwards of, anywhere from 89 to 95+% of the seniors have gotten at least one shot. So I think in terms of vulnerable populations, I think we've done a nice job there. As the chair alluded to, we also did receive notification this week that the shared services grant for health services that, again, was spearheaded by the town of Northborough. I hate to keep giving Northborough the credit on this and everything and that, but they stepped forward and took the lead. And we got the full grant award of $300,000 per year for 3 years. There was something that I was made aware of in the grant, is that it is $300,000 annually for 3 years. And then there is the opportunity of 3 renewals for 3 years. So the grant potentially has an end date of 2033. Depending on this. Now, there needs to be a work plan put together as to how the funding is going to work. And then it is renewed based on, the fact that you show a continued need for the funding. The grant is set up primarily to provide nursing and inspectional services. And so the communities will continue to take a look at how that work plan is going to be put together and how those funds are going to be shared. But it's a great opportunity, and I'm hoping that that our Board of Health is able to take advantage of it to help to provide these services. We talk about wanting to expand the Board of Health and what we do and how many people we need to do it, and maybe this is an opportunity to provide a bridge, and it could be a long bridge to get to what what we're looking to do in terms of staffing.
Mark,
Yes.
can I ask a question?
Sure.
Again, kudos to all the boards of health making this happen. It appears highly likely that FDA is going to approve the Pfizer vaccine for folks at age 12 to 15, probably early next week. Do you know if we actually have plans underway to open it up to that age group if people choose to go in that direction?
I think that there is, I did see something, I think, about a meeting of the group to have that conversation. I think also one of the other topics, Sam, is the fact that the governor has announced that some of the mass vaccination sites are closing down, and now they're going to focus more on some of these regional sites that they've set up, including the one we have in Westboro. So the question is, how is that going to transition? What is it going to mean for more business? Does it mean that we're going to be in business longer? And then how do we, how are we going to be getting some of this vaccine for the 12 to 15-year-olds, and how is that going to be administered? So hopefully more information to come. I think it's an exciting proposal that we'll be able to take part in.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Marty, can I add one thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen.
So, and again, Mark, this is more of a question for Marty and the board. I think based on everything we've heard today and how well the transition has gone with opening this regional facility, I would like to request that we as the Board of Selectmen send a letter to the Northborough Board of Selectmen, just thanking them for Kristen Black spearheading this, and taking the lead on all of these things. And again, Southborough has benefited greatly from it. And I just think it would be a good gesture for us to extend our thanks. That's all.
Yeah, Lisa, you mentioned it to me earlier, credit where credit is due. And I don't think it's just a nice gesture. I think it's a necessary gesture given the amount of work that was done here. So Mark, maybe you and Vanessa can put together a draft letter, and I can work with you a little bit on it as well. And Lisa, you should take a look at it as well. Okay.
Sure, happy to put that together. I think I agree with Lisa. It's well deserved. And you know, we've had a good relationship with Northborough on that, but in this particular instance, Ms. Black has really, put an effort out there that I think all of the participating communities have really appreciated. Couple of other quick things. I wanted to let you know there was a letter that I believe that was sent to the board from Melissa Danza regarding Conservation Commission member Judith Watson. She recently completed her fundamentals training program, certificate of achievement for the coursework for the through the Mass Association of Conservation Commissions. Ms. Danza has said now a majority of her commissioners have this certification, which basically, helps them to be better prepared, when they're discussing permits, when they're looking at these things. And she did mention also that a lot of her members are taking ongoing coursework and everything in that to stay up on these issues. So it's always nice to see, our permitting boards, staying up on the educational pieces. I also, while I'm on conservation, I received a message from Andrew Pfaff on Finance Committee advisory, and he's been working with Ms. Danza on an MVP grant, the deadline of which is later this week. It's a $30,500 grant to develop an impervious surface mapping layer for our GIS system, and this is something that I think several other communities have done and have gone for this grant and gotten the money successfully, and believe that it'll be a nice tool in the toolbox for conservation. There is a 25% match, $77,625. My understanding is that advisory is going to put that up if in fact we do get that, so there will not be an issue with the matching portion of it. But the board, this board would need to authorize through me that obviously if we do get the grant, the match is available, and secondly that that the board will accept the grant if awarded. So I just wanted to, normally these are things that I've signed, but since the timing worked that we had a meeting just before it needed to happen, I wanted to make sure you were aware and see if there was any issues with us moving forward with that.
I think that's a great idea. I think that's an important tool for stormwater management, and we're going to get a lot tighter restrictions on stormwater management going forward. So I think this helps us get out in front of that.
Yeah, you don't need a vote from us, Mark. You just want to.
No, the shaking of the heads was fine. No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right.
And I believe I had one other item, but I'll turn that over to Ms. Hale.
Two quick things for you, actually. Earlier in the year, when you were talking about your goal sessions, that seems like a really long time ago now, we did talk about working on some diversity and inclusion efforts. This is the time of year where we're looking at, can we schedule any trainings, any employee trainings coming up before we close out the fiscal year? So I have been in contact with a trainer we have used many times in the past who has a new session on diversity and inclusion, which focuses on, unconscious bias, appropriate language, looking at appropriate policies. So we have had a very brief discussion, Mark and I, earlier today about asking the personnel board if they would be willing to help fund that. But I wanted to run that by the board first, since this is a matter we had talked about earlier in the year. If the board is in support of an employee training like that, you do have a little bit of money in your budget because nobody's been anywhere this year. So if you're willing to help partner or fund a training like that, I wanted to find that out and see if you'd like me to move forward in that direction.
Seems like a good idea, not just because it lets us check another box on that goal sheet. The merits speak for themselves. So I think at least my reaction is it's a good idea. What sort of money are we talking about?
So I'm sorry, I should have said that, Mr. Chairman. We were talking about between $2,500 and $4,000 for a virtual session.
Okay, go around. Lisa?
It's fine. Vanessa, where would that money, I know you said the selectmen's budget. Mark, do you have any specific line item that it would come from? Just curious.
I don't offhand know, but I
Okay.
do know.
Yeah, in general, we do have an employee training line item in our own budget. We've used very little of that,
Okay.
of course, this year, so we could look at that as a
Okay.
funding source.
No, that's fine. I'm fine with it. Thank you.
And Ms. Hale, correct me, but I believe that it's 3 sessions.
It would be a 3-part series, all virtual.
It's a multiple session series so it wouldn't just be for like a 1, 2, 3 hour training. It's multiple days, 3-day training.
Chelsea?
Thanks, Vanessa. Did you talk to personnel board about this yet, or?
Not yet. We are looking at, I want to put a memo together for them, for they are meeting next week, but we wanted to run this by the board first.
Okay, I think it sounds like it's a good training to have in place.
Brian? Oh, I'm sorry, Chelsea. Thanks. Brian?
No additional questions or comments? Sounds like a great program.
Sam?
Good idea. Vanessa, would this be open to all staff on a voluntary basis, or would you, for example, say the department heads particularly need to attend, or how would you determine who?
So in most cases, Mr. Stivers, we encourage it as much as possible, but when it comes to some departments like public safety, it's very hard for them to make it mandatory and not incur overtime costs. So we do strongly encourage it, though.
Okay. All right, thank you. Good idea. I support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
The final thing is, Vanessa, do you know who the provider would be at this point?
Yes, her name is Callie Ritter. She used to be affiliated with Maya, our insurance company. She's done sessions for us in the past on customer service, respectful workplace, things of that nature.
Okay. And is there a program that exists, something written that shows what it's going to be about?
She does. I can share that with the board.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. The other thing I just wanted to take 1 minute to talk about was we have been talking to some other municipalities about how to get the board back in person and work on a hybrid meeting format for Southborough Cable Access Media, Zoom, because that's been so popular. So Jay Montillo, our new IT manager, who is here, I think, in the audience, he and I had a site visit yesterday down to Medfield, who has done a really good job at setting this up. We are
Vanessa, you froze.
working with Sam.
Vanessa, you froze.
See when. Oh, sorry. Am
That's
I
okay.
back?
You're back.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yes.
Better?
So far,
Okay,
so good.
sorry. I'll be quick. Sam is not ready to come back in person yet. That board is talking about it and how to effectuate all the required technology to do the Zoom as well. The board, if you so choose, could come back in person at any time and we would continue your meetings on Zoom if you felt you wanted to all be in the same room. So we would want to sort of rehearse audio and things like that. If you were interested in meeting in person without an audience, of course, it would just be the board and Mark probably in the meeting room.
I mean, my very strong preference is to, if it can be done, is to have the meetings in person as soon as possible. I just think that, we need to, as whenever possible, start sending the message that things are moving towards normal. And, if folks are vaccinated and if they, otherwise are being careful, and I've got a, I bought a super duper little camera, and it's kind of amazing what sort of coverage you can get on it with a wide lens. I think it'd be relatively, I think it'd be a lot cleaner and easier to follow than the last in-person meeting we did last summer. So that's my feeling is I'm glad to hear you and Jay are pushing in this direction. And my inclination is to push as hard as we possibly can. But I'll go around. I'll start with you, Lisa.
No, I think it's great. I've had conversations with Mark as well as Vanessa on this as well, with how we could make it work and how we could also utilize CARES money to be able to do some of the things we might need to move forward, because I think this board has been pretty clear that even when things get back to normal, we would like to still have all the meetings taped. I think the public has benefited greatly and is much more aware of what's going on. So by doing a split platform of Zoom and SAM, I think it works. So I'm very happy to be moving in this direction, and then hopefully we will be able to meet soon, even though I'm going to miss wearing my slippers during the meetings. So thank you.
Ms. Malinowski.
Thanks, Vanessa. Are you looking at outfitting the public safety meeting room, the townhouse meeting room, and senior center meeting room, or kind of what do you?
I think in the beginning, we were thinking with your board in particular, bringing you back to your normal meeting room, because it would still be run on the Zoom platform. It wouldn't be, and our YouTube account, of course. Sam is not ready to come back as of right now. They hope to be able to do that soon. So it would be like we are now. You would just all be in the meeting room at the townhouse.
Okay.
If the board is agreeable.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense, Vanessa. Let's, as excited as I am about pushing this forward, let's start small and get it right in one place before we move on to others. Brian?
Yep, no additional comments, questions. Great idea to
Sam?
get back in person.
Good idea. I think we can work more effectively together if we're in the same room, frankly. So I would look forward to that.
Okay. Vanessa, thanks. And Jay, thank you for doing that. Jay, anything we brought you over? Anything you want to add on the, particularly on the technology front?
No, there's just, if you guys can hear me okay, just want to make sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's just been a lot of investigating on both ends, and Medfield has been very helpful as far as getting me the information I need. And just talking to the people at SAM today, it looks positive. They definitely have people on their end that they can reach out to and try to like merge that technology together with their equipment that they have on site. So hopefully we just have a good collaboration, and then a lot of testing, probably a lot of trial and error, but we'll get there at some point.
Okay, and you haven't left after a couple of weeks. That's a good sign.
So far, so good. Everything's good on this end.
How are things going? Just to don't want to put you on the spot, but just
everything's been going as good as it can be. No, the team has been amazing. Everybody there has been helping me a lot, and that's the part that really matters, is having a good support team behind you. And I felt that right from the beginning, and I've been feeling it every day since. So I've even seen Chelsea come in a couple times already and said hi to her. It's been good to see people and just have that team behind me to get the support I need. So it's been good.
all right, good to hear. All right, and thanks for being here tonight.
No problem.
All right, are we done with our respective reports? I think we are.
Yes, thank you.
All right, consent agenda. Ms. Malinowski.
No holds.
No holds. Anyone else? All right, I move that we approve items A, B, C, and D of the consent agenda.
Second.
Second by Mr. Shea. Discussion none. Ms. Braccio.
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski.
Aye.
Mr. Shea.
Aye.
Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
And Mr. Healy is aye. So all those consent agenda items are approved and accepted and appointed. And I'll just remark particularly, it was good news for item D that there was the potential for a little bit delay there, but I'm happy that, through the chief reporting that Ms. Fontana passed the necessary tests and was ready to be appointed as a student police officer. That's good news. All right, moving on to item 6A, the Mooney Complex. Is Mr. Murphy with us?
I didn't see him, Marty,
Yeah.
but
I mean,
I'm
doesn't
happy.
doesn't need to be. Obviously, the members of the board had an opportunity to review the request from the Southborough Little League. Okay.
Yes.
And Mr. Purple, I'll toss this to you in some respects. Do we need to take action or just indicate? I mean, we've previously voted in favor of naming this field in honor of Mr. Schifrin. Should we just reiterate that? Where do things stand? Now that we have a particular date, identify that as the date when the field will be dedicated?
Well, I will say that I think you had a different board
Yeah.
at the time, and I believe Ms. Malinowski was not part of the board yet, so it may be, good for the board to take another vote. I don't know whether you want any more specificity now that you do have a date and everything, but I do think it'd be good for the board to take another vote.
And Marty, if I could just jump in just
Sure,
quickly, if you don't mind, and I don't know if you were going to say any of this, but if you are, just tell me to stop and
No,
you
no,
can
you,
certainly continue.
you've been much closer to this than I have, so I think it's appropriate that you talk about it.
Yeah, so this has been going on, and again, Chelsea, this is just some background for you as well, and anybody that may be listening. So this has been going on for probably a year and a half. Mr. Shea was involved as well. We served with Brian. I know Mr. Kalenda's in the audience tonight as well. We all felt very strongly when we were approached by baseball about this. So on June 2nd, which is Lou Gehrig's Day, that is when the field will be named after Brian, and Brian's daughter Courtney will have the privilege of playing on that field in honor of her dad. The only thing
Hey, Lisa, I apologize for interrupting you.
Yes.
But I see that Mrs. Schifrin is in the audience.
Yes.
And I didn't know if you'd noticed that. Should we
I did.
bring her over for this discussion?
Absolutely.
Okay. Hi, Mrs. Schifrin, how are you? Hi, Mrs. Schifrin, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you all?
Oh, and I'm after saying, turn things over to Ms. Braccio.
Good evening, Christine. How are you? Good evening, Christine. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so honored that you guys are, making this happen for Brian. It's just so important for our family and for my kids. So it means the world to us.
No, and we know how involved Brian was. In baseball. Oh, is anyone else hearing that?
Yeah, no, we're getting.
Hearing that?
Yeah, no, we're getting.
Okay. So again, we know how involved Brian was in baseball, Christine, and how much we as members of the board enjoyed serving with Brian as well. So this request, I think, was a relatively easy one for us to make, and knowing that Courtney's going to play on the field in honor of Brian. Mr. Shea, I don't know if there's something you want to add, seeing as Christine is here as well, seeing as you serve with Brian as well.
Yeah, it's, as Lisa as you had mentioned, this is something that we actually had discussions with Recreation prior to COVID setting in, and had every expectation that we would be able to do something last spring at one of the fields. And unfortunately, what happened. It was beyond anybody's control, but very, 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 very happy to see it come through now. And I look forward very much to being there on June 2nd as well to take part in the festivities.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Also, Marty, I did reach out to Recreation today. They only had a request they wanted me to share with the board as we take the vote. Jen Hansen wanted to ask, if the board takes the vote tonight, they request that the Recreation Department and the Recreation Commission are looped in, and that we sign on and assist with installation, partner with DPW, whatever signage or markings are added to the fields, as we maintain responsibility for them and take into consideration all users of the Mooney and Finn complex. So I would just ask in the vote that we make clear that the Recreation Department and the Recreation Commission are to be involved in signage, placement of signage, and just that, they work collaboratively together before June 2nd to get this done.
All right, you've got that piece of paper in front of you. I am going to let you make the motion.
All right, my pleasure. I make a motion that the board support the naming of the Brian Schifrin Memorial Field at the Mooney Field at Finn School, with the stipulation that the baseball league work with the Recreation Department and Recreation Commission to make sure that they also sign off on and assist with the installation and whatever signage or markings are added to the field. And I would just request that they collaborate with Recreation Commission.
Second.
All right, discussion. None. Ms. Braccio?
Happily, aye.
Ms. Malinowski?
Aye.
Mr. Shea?
Aye.
Mr. Stivers?
Aye.
Mr. Healy is aye. I suspect we will see you, if not before then, on June 2nd. I think it'll be a
Thank you all very much.
All right. Have a good rest of the evening.
Good
Good
night.
night. Thank you.
All right.
Good night.
All right. Moving on to. All right. I'm getting reverb. Something. All right. It's gone. Okay. Moving on to item 6B, discussion regarding flag placements at the old burial ground. And Mr. Kalenda and Mr. Wynot are here for the veterans. Here is my my intention for how to proceed. First, I'm just going to try to set the table as best I can for where we find ourselves. Then I'm going to ask the veterans to just elaborate a little bit on their proposal for what they think should happen with the placements at the old burial ground. Then there were some people who submitted and are the spokespeople, I guess is the best way to put it, for a petition, I think of just Southborough residents, although it might be beyond Southborough residents, I don't know, who said they wanted to express concerns as well. And then having talked to Mr. Kalenda, I think the veterans are shooting for a relatively modest, I don't know if that translates into 8, 10, 12 minutes or so presentation. I'm going to try to keep discussion on top of that in the same range. By the same token, if it looks like we can accommodate everybody without going to a completely disproportionate amount of time, then we'll do that. But if not, I think since we're going to have a meeting on May 10th, my preference would be to hear the discussion tonight, hear the input from folks, let folks know that there's one final opportunity if they want to submit emails to us, other written materials, and that we will actually, if we are going to take a vote, that we'll do it at our meeting on May 10th, since we are going to be meeting that night. And that way we can move on and get the town meeting stuff that we need to get done tonight. I mean, it's convenient in some respects that we're going to be meeting on May 10th. So with that, does anybody have any discussion or issues with what I just laid out for the way I want to deal with it going forward tonight and shooting towards May 10th? No, looks like everybody's comfortable with that approach. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to try to set the table a little bit. Number one, I have learned more about revolutionary flags than I thought I might. And it's actually been pretty fascinating, actually. Obviously, it's covered a wide range, but it's obviously focused on the Don't Tread on Me flags. And they have, in some respects, remarkable histories. That large parts of it I was not aware of. And they are very much, the Don't Tread on Me flags are very much part of the fabric of American history. I don't think that's arguable. It goes back to, it's hard to trump Benjamin Franklin, but apparently folks who had a very good eye for designing flags were able to do that and were able to incorporate some of his ideas and come up with the Don't Tread on Me flags. They go back to presentation to the First Continental Congress. They were accepted by the First Continental Congress for flags that were used during the Revolutionary War. It appears, although again, nailing down history is always a little bit difficult, but it appears that the Don't Tread on Me flag designed by Mr. Gadsden, that one of its first, maybe its first use with the newly constituted Marines was actually helpful in saving Boston, with intercepting some British ships that were going to be used to help supply the blockade of Boston at the beginnings of the Revolutionary War. As I said, very storied history. It then fast forward, they continued their involvement. I mean, they were very prominent during our bicentennial in 1976. They were perhaps even more prominent after 9/11, when the Navy displayed them on all of their ships as a symbol of the war on terrorism. And again, that's just a brief thumbnail to say these are historic flags that are very much a fabric of the history of the United States. That's number one. Number two, the old burial ground. These and all of the flags that are up there have been there, I don't know the exact date, but they've been there for decades. They're not of recent vintage. They were put there in support of recognition of the fact that Massachusetts, Southborough, people from Southborough were very much a part of the Revolutionary War that led to the creation of the United States. And obviously the veterans were instrumental. I think all of us have been up to that old burial ground, whether it's on a Veterans Day or Memorial Day, often very moving tributes. And again, there's nothing recent about the placement of those flags there. There's nothing reactive about it. They were put there to honor our history and folks who fought to help create the United States. Number three, there's also no question that in recent vintage that individuals and groups whose views are antithetical to what was fought for, quite frankly, in 1776 and beyond, have made use of those flags, and they've attempted to co-opt those powerful historical flags from the history of the United States for their own uses. There's no question about that they have attempted to do that. It's unfortunate, but it's happened. In terms of Southborough, though, and those flags, I have not, and I looked pretty carefully for this, I have not found any indication that there's been any such co-opting, whether the specific placement of those flags in the town of Southborough, the presence of the flags in the town of Southborough, uses elsewhere by the town of Southborough of the Don't Tread on Me flags or otherwise. To the extent that co-opting has attempted to be taken place by individuals or groups, it's not been something that's endemic to our town, thankfully. And I think that's really important. And finally, and I talked with Mr. Kalenda about this, I understand, particularly given the use of the powerful symbolism of the Don't Tread on Me flags by individuals and groups whose views, again, are antithetical to what this country is about. I understand how that can create the sort of reaction that we've seen from a sizable number of folks in the town of Southborough. So what I've talked with Mr. Kalenda about is the possibility of for really any of the flags that are put up. There's one of the things we talked about with Pocket Park in the library area is it being part of a historical walk in Southborough that it would include, one of my heroes, Henry Knox, and the little monument to him, but as well there's a great deal of history in the downtown, the center area of Southborough, and if the board's determination is that those flags, all of those flags, some of those flags should stay, that it would be appropriate to, maybe in coordination with other boards and committees in town, to put those flags in context, to make it clear, and to underscore that the town of Southborough's recognition of those flags in a historical context is that, and it's honoring the history of those flags and people who fought both back in the Revolutionary War and afterwards under those flags, and who presumably had friends who died fighting under those flags. But to put it in context and to make it clear that any again antithetical message that someone might seek to draw from the presence of those flags is that co-opting doesn't happen in Southborough. There's no home for that here. And the final thing I'll say before turning it over to Mr. Kalenda is that it's clear from the information we've received, the materials we've received, that people have strong feelings on both sides of this. I think I said, several weeks ago that we are a small town, and we are and should be a civil town. And the fact that we disagree about this, and on a wide spectrum of views, I suspect, that's all that should be, that we disagree with this. We have different views. And Vanessa, I am going to be very careful. I'm going to ask you, if I think that any of the comments that anyone makes during the course of our discussion tonight cross the line into anything that implies anything other than folks being thoughtful and honorable about their views here, I'm going to have you cut them off, period. So anyone who might want to weigh in, you are forewarned that this is going to be a civil discussion. I'm not going to have any tolerance for any sort of personal attacks or suggestions that, again, people's positions on this issue, one way or the other, are anything but thoughtful, honorable, and in their views, in the best interest of the town of Southborough. So with that, before I go to Mr. Kalenda, does anybody on the board have anything to add to the unfortunately longer than I had hoped table setting for our discussion? Okay. Mr. Kalenda is being brought over. Dan, do you want Steve Wynant to be brought over as well, or?
Yes, please, Marty.
All right. And anyone besides yourself and Steve?
So right now, Steve and I were asked to represent the veterans. So, but there may be others who may raise a hand and may want to speak as well.
Fair enough. I get that. All right. With that, Mr. Kalenda and Mr. Wynant, I will turn things over to you for your discussion from again, the veterans who have been the stewards of the old burial ground for as long as certainly I can remember, and your thoughts and proposals for us for where how you think we should proceed in this area. All right.
Sure. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting us. And I'll try and be brief. There's a lot to cover. I do want to, and I asked Vanessa in a little bit, I do want to go over briefly the history of the flags, including the Gadsden flag that are at the old burial ground. And I do have some comments that I'd like to make. In fact, although after hearing Mr. Healy's opening, I was almost, if I were still fortunate to be on the board, I would ask to move the vote. So again, thank you for that. And we as veterans respect everyone's opinion. We fight for the right for everyone, for freedom of speech, for people to express their views, to freely and peaceably assemble. We fight against oppression. We fight against racism. We fight against those things that go against our Constitution. So, and we also fight for history. Over the last few weeks, an issue was created, and I accentuate that word. We think this issue was created. First through what we believe were just anonymous complaints about the Gadsden flag in particular and some other flags. Commander Wynant and I heard from many of our veterans regarding the issue, and there wasn't one veteran that responded to us in the negative. Wasn't one veteran that thought that any of those flags, including the Gadsden flag, should be removed. And we are requesting that this board leave those flags as is. The historical nature of those flags cannot be understated. They've been there for decades. But just one thing, Mr. Chairman, before I continue, I do want to stress, as I've done before, that when this issue was created, there was a verbal threat made by Mr. Wyshan, the current chair of our historical commission, against Mr. Wynant, that either he remove the Gadsden flag.
Hey, Dan, I'm going to jump in. Okay.
Yep.
And that's been something we've discussed here. And I've made it clear that that's something that I think should be addressed down the line. I really would like to avoid discussion about, I hear you, but I would like to avoid discussion about anything other than the table setting that I did leading in. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
okay.
So, and I agree with you, as you stated before, the fact that certain factions may have taken a historical flag and made it a symbol of their own doing does not in any way change the historical nature of those flags. From my perspective, were it that easy to do so, history would be replete with flags, documents, markers, symbols, you name it, that change every time some individual or group chooses to reclassify it in their own personal way. History is history. It needs to be learned, understood in its historical context. Misguided people can misappropriate anything, including a flag. It doesn't change its historical significance. This Gadsden flag was created by Christopher Gadsden in 1775 during the American Revolution. It was seen as an inspiration to colonialists fighting British rule. And throughout our nation's history, men and women serving in our military have carried flags into battle. In fact, as we all should know, there is a man buried in our cemetery who was the recipient of the Medal of Honor. His role in the Civil War was to carry the flag. And if he fell, then someone else would pick up that flag and carry it forward. So the flags have been an inspiration to many fighting on behalf of our nation for centuries. And at this point, I would like to just briefly go over a few of the flags that are there. So I don't know if Ms. Hale is able to show the different flags to folks.
Yep, hang on one second.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, if I go long, please give me a 3-minute warning if I go even approach 15 minutes. I hope not to.
You're 5 minutes in, Dan, so you're in good shape so far.
All right, thank you. So first one is the Fort Moultrie flag. This Liberty flag was designed by a commission in 1775 by Colonel Moultrie to prepare for war with Great Britain. His forces eventually led the British to withdraw, saving Charleston. So that's some brief history on that one. The Bedford flag is next. That one, Nathaniel Page took it into the battle at Concord. These flags served as important rallying points on the battlefield of the 18th century. That Bedford flag came to be a symbol of the early American Revolution, and also, and specifically the militia's resistance at Concord. The next one is an interesting one, the Bunker Hill flag, and it's neat because of at the top left, you'll see a green pine tree. And, that pine tree started to appear on some flags in the 17th century, grew, ever more popular on New England ships. And then by the time of the American Revolution, those pine flags gained more prominence and were seen on Patriot New Englander naval vessels that were even on the Charles River. And then, there was some controversy as to whether or not, what flag actually flew at Bunker Hill in 1775 at the onset of the Revolutionary War. But there was an interview of a daughter of a Bunker Hill veteran who stated that that flag was hoisted at Breeds Hill prior to the battle. It's also become a symbol. It also became a symbol of the Battle of Bunker Hill and Charlestown, and featured in a interesting enough, a 1968 U.S. postage stamp. The next one is the Culpeper flag. That one was carried by Culpeper Minutemen from Culpeper County, Virginia. Those colonialists were part of Patrick Henry's 1st Virginia Regiment. And the flag was a version of the Gadsden flag. created earlier by, again, South Carolinian Christopher Gadsden. Again, now it may come up later. Gadsden, to my belief, from what I've read, was a slave owner. He was not a perfect person at all. But he created a flag, and that flag was again part of the rallying cry and used throughout the Revolutionary War, in particular on naval vessels. So the Culpeper flag is if you can see it, a white flag with an American rattlesnake in the middle over the words "Don't tread on me," just as we have on the Gadsden flag. The rattlesnake in particular became a symbol for the colonies before the French and Indian War. So Benjamin Franklin, our own Ben Franklin, published a cartoon and that had the flag, that had the rattlesnake. He also published an article in the Pennsylvania Gazette condemning the British practice of sending convicts to the American colonies, and stated we should return the favor by sending a bunch of rattlesnakes. So that brings us to the Gadsden flag. So that was, again, created by Colonel Gadsden from South Carolina, and he was one of 7 members of the Marine Commission at the time. And those first Marines enlisted in the city of Philadelphia and carried drums painted yellow and depicted a coiled rattlesnake with 13 rattles, along with the motto, "Don't tread on me." It's the first recorded mention of the Gadsden flag's symbolism. Ben Franklin talked about the rattlesnake quite a bit. He stated, quote, "She never begins an attack, nor when once engaged ever surrenders. She is therefore an emblem of magnanimity and true courage. She never wounds till she has generously given notice, even to her enemy, and caution him against the danger of treading on her." So as you can see, again, our own Ben Franklin talks about that flag and the rattlesnake in it. In 1754, he used the snake to illustrate another point. He sketched and carved and published the first known political cartoon in an American newspaper. It again was the image of a snake cut into 8 sections, representing the individual colonies, and the curves of the snake suggested the coastline. New England was combined into one section as the head of the snake, South Carolina at the tail. And beneath it were the words "Join or Die." Dozens of papers from Massachusetts to South Carolina ran Franklin's speech or a version of it. And our own Boston Gazette recreated the snake with the words "Unite and Conquer" coming from its mouth. So that's some of the history. And Vanessa, I have nothing more on the flags there. That's some of the history of those flags, the historical nature of them. And there was also a recent case that came before the EEOC where a government employee was wearing the Gadsden flag emblem on a hat, and another employee thought it discriminatory and wanted the person to remove the hat. It's important to know that the decision by the EEOC that addressed procedural issues did not determine that the Gadsden flag was racist or discriminatory, and it didn't ban it. Again, if the US government is not banning it, I'll be surprised if the Southborough Board of Selectmen does, but you'll let us know on the 11th. Others have brought up the events at the US Capitol on January 6th. And yes, the Gadsden flag appeared there, was used by some, was co-opted by some. A number of other flags were also there, including the flags of India, Israel, Vietnam, Georgia, South Korea, Canada, Australia, Iran, and yes, our own American flag. So have they lost their historical significance because some misguided people chose to carry them? Then we also reached out to Brian Stearns, our veterans agent. Mr. Stearns then reached out to a number of his fellow veteran service officers and wrote the following to Commander Wynot and me. Steve and Dan, as a follow-up to my inquiry with the veteran service officers around the state, there was 100% agreement with keeping the flag in place. As I said before, the Gadsden flag is a symbol of hope, not hate. It has inspired generations. Americans will not be a doormat to those who attempt to harm us or oppress others, but is a welcome mat for those that have suffered at the wrath of said oppression. And Mr. Chairman, I'll close. As veterans, we have fought oppression, defended our Constitution as we serve the American people. We understand history. We value flags, symbols, and markers. They have inspired Americans from the colonial revolution to the Great World Wars, Korea, Vietnam, and the war on terrorism. No act of a misguided few can suddenly cause a historical flag of hundreds of years to suddenly lose its historical significance. The flags at our old burial ground are historic, with many dating back hundreds of years. They should remain exactly where they are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Dan, very quickly, one of the things I mentioned was the idea of whether it's through literature or a plaque or something, underscoring that if, assuming the flags remain, underscoring the context, and that the presence of the flags in this instance, the old burial ground, were, as you described, and I think I described a little bit in my initial remarks, that they are, if anything, contrary to the co-opting of the history of those flags by the groups whose views both you and I have described, but putting them in context and explaining that they are there because of their historic significance. Is that something you think that yourself and the veterans, whether it's through an ad hoc group or a working group or something like that, would be supportive of?
Mr. Chairman, I'll say completely supportive. So, again, I think we have to learn from history. Part of that is in any way that we can provide a placard with information about flags. I tried to do some of that tonight in a pretty quick fashion. You did it, some of it earlier. I think that can only help to educate our residents on the historical nature of these flags. And I spoke with Commander Wynot earlier. He also is fully supportive of any effort like that to add some narrative to the historical nature of these flags.
All right, I'm going to go very quickly if any members of the board have any comments or questions for Mr. Calenda. I'll start with you, Ms. Braccio.
Thank you. Good evening, Dan. Thank you for coming. I'm not sure that it's as much a question as a comment potentially. So I did have the opportunity to speak to, there's some of the military contacts that I have as well. And one of the things, and I guess it's more to share with the board as well as our veterans and anyone listening, I asked their thoughts on this particular flag, and he agreed it's a hot topic right now. And he said, it's standard on our sleeve. I wear one on my NWU camo uniform and was flown on the front of all Navy ships, first called Union Jack, not Gadsden, from 2002 to 2019 as the mission was global war on terror. So Dan, I didn't know if you're aware that our, or maybe even Steve, that our Navy officers currently are wearing this patch, and they did from 2002 to 2019 on their military camo uniforms.
Yes, Ms. Braccio, thank you for that. So to my understanding, and I'm an Army guy, but to my understanding, many naval officers, enlisted personnel wear the version of the then Gadsden flag. It's the Union Jack. It has the snake coiling through red and white stripes, which I believe are 13 stripes. And that it also has the words "Don't tread on me." Those are worn by naval personnel to this day.
Yes, and also I just want to share with the board just some thoughts that as well, that one of the things he was concerned about from a different angle was, he also said, I quote, "I have also been trained for funeral ceremony, as they call on us when needed for those. And I would hate to think the current environment would affect what is present at the site of a person who served while wearing that patch." So he did say as well that, as anything with controversy, that it's the people who, the flag is not the controversy. And again, these are his quotes. "The flag is not the controversy. It's the people who must misrepresent it when flying it." And he said, that the service eventually may do something about it, but at this current time and through after 9/11 on the war on terror that we had overseas, it was worn on a uniform. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And one other thing I found as I was going through is and Dan, if you said this, I apologize, or Marty even, the 13 rattles on the flag represent the 13 colonies on the original flag. I have other comments that I'm going to withhold. These are just something I thought had to do with the discussion that was going on. I know we have a lot more people to hear from as well. So I'll just leave it at that for now, Marty. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Ms. Malinowski. Anything?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kalenda, for your presentation. I just have one question, and you may not know the answer to it, but when Mr. Stearns reached out to his counterparts, do you know if he got feedback on other municipalities that have this flag flying in Massachusetts?
Well, I know that when he had reached out to a number of his fellow veteran service officers regarding the Gadsden flag, and as to whether or not, it remains historic, has it been, has its significance changed in their communities? And they were 100% in agreement that the flag is historic. They knew that this was something that was happening in the town of Southborough, and there was some anonymous complaints by some who wanted it removed. They were in unanimous support of the veterans of Southborough in requesting that it remain along with the others flying there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All set, Chelsea? Mr. Shea.
No questions or comments from me right now. I look forward to hearing from all who wish to speak tonight, though.
And Mr. Stivers.
Same comment as Mr. Shea. Thank you.
Okay. Steve, you were there. Are your thoughts covered by Mr. Kalenda, or do you want to weigh in?
My thoughts are definitely covered by your opening statement, sir. Thank you. And by Mr. Kalenda. But before I make my comments, I saw that Mr. Mr. Stearns is there. So I'd like to hear real quick from him of what he had heard from the other VSOs that he had spoken with. Brian, is he available?
I think Ms. Hale can bring him over. And while that's being done, Dan, you came in right at 15 minutes, just so you'll know. We extended it out a little bit with some questions, but.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Hey, everyone. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
I've been listening in, but I've been on YouTube and I just got back, so I apologize for being late.
Did you hear Mr. Wynot's lead in to us bringing you over?
Yes, sir, I did. And I also heard Ms. Malinowski's question as well. And to address her question first, I did reach out to other towns, the VSOs in other towns, and there are certain towns that are flying the flag, and that flag will remain in their towns. I will not comment on the names of those towns at this time, but I will tell you at a later date if you want to request that. But 100%, we have 351 municipalities, and I didn't reach out to every 351. But the vast majority, and Worcester County and Middlesex County, I did reach out to, and they are all in agreement with the comments that were made tonight. And thank you, Ms. Braccio, for your comments as well. Mr. Kalenda did state that I had commented on one other thing, and that was that this is a flag of hope, not of hate, of hope. And it's always been a flag of hope for our soldiers and sailors, especially our sailors. And that's what we want it to remain, is a symbol of hope, not hate. So getting back to your question, Mr. Healy. What was
Oh,
that?
no, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to, I just wanted to make sure that you had heard the lead in by Mr. Wynot and you
Oh, yes,
covered
sir. Yes, sir.
the items that he said you were going to talk about.
Yes, sir.
All right, terrific. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And I'm now going to look for hands.
Real quick.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Can I, real quick, can I just throw my comment in there? I wanted to hang Brian out to dry a little bit. That's what veterans do to each other, just to test them.
No problem.
Real quickly, I totally agree. You've done some great research there, Mr. Healy. Same with Dan. The Bertnazzi, Leo Bertnazzi was the caretaker of all the cemeteries. And those flags, as best I can recollect, were put up in place when Mr. Bertnazzi was there. As the commander of the VFW, I followed after his brother, Angie. And when I took over as the commander, that was one of my goals, was to ensure that those flags continued. And I am quite sure that Mr. Bertnazzi would never do anything to offend the town of Southborough. The Bertnazzi family was well respected in this town, especially Leo, for what he did at the cemeteries. So those flags were flown to represent our country from the Revolutionary War. Do I think Mr. Bertnazzi went back and researched each and every one of them? I seriously doubt it. But I'll guarantee you there was no malice in this man's heart. The same with Angie and the same with mine. Those flags represent those that are buried. And I thought I had heard a comment in the past that there were no Revolutionary War soldiers buried at the old burial grounds, which is incorrect. I have a listing of the 50 that are buried there, which is why we put the Betsy Ross flag on each one of them just prior to Memorial Day to celebrate and to honor their service to this country. As Dan mentioned, with the Gadsden flag and Ben Franklin, the sliced snake, which was to represent the 13 original colonies in their fighting to gain independence from England, which we did. So it's bothersome in recent months or years that these groups have taken those flags for their own little, whatever you want to call it, the white supremacist groups or whatever, the ones that stormed the Capitol. I will guarantee you most of those that had the flag running around had no idea what if it was even called a Gadsden flag. It was a flag they were flying, they were running around with. So it's not to show white oppression. It's not to show racism or anything else that some people have portrayed it to be. These are Revolutionary War era flags that we fly to ensure that those that gave the sacrifice up at the old burial ground are remembered by. And that's how it should be. If you, the board, decides that to take them down because a few disgruntled people have bought into the idea that they're this or that, then it will be very disappointing to the town and to the veterans. As Dan says, we served our country. I'm no hero. Dan knows hero. And there's none of the veterans of this town will claim themselves a hero. We did our jobs. We went to serve our country, as Brian did and as many others did. And we served the country so that stuff like this doesn't happen. So I urge you to really think about your decision to look at those flags, to look at that flag that's over the town hall. Thank you, Mr. Purple, and all the board for finally getting that project done. That was great. I have yet to see it because I'm in Florida. I'm returning in another week or so. I've yet to see that. I'm looking forward to seeing that new flag outside the town hall. But that's what we served under. And every time I hear the national anthem, and every time I see that flag, there's a special meaning to it. And for those that don't understand it, they need to go to other countries and realize what we have here and what the freedoms that we have. And a bunch of us served to do that. So with that, I will dispel. I'm not the orator that Mr. Calander is. I'm just an old Navy guy that sometimes blurts out a lot of things that comes from his heart, good, bad, or indifferent. That's what you get. But I urge you to think and make the correct decision.
All right, Mr. Wynot, thank you very much. And you're a better orator than you think you are, I think. All right, gentlemen, I am going to have you exit. And the Ms. Deans Rowe and Miss, and I'm going to apologize in advance because I know I'll mispronounce the name, Saita, were two that expressed and requested the opportunity to address the board. So I would like to go to them first. If we could bring over Ms. Deans Rowe. And again, apologies, Ms. Saita. Is that not working? Oh, there we go. All right.
Hello, Chairman Healy and the board. Thank you for having us.
Sure.
I would like to start by just clarifying that myself and Ms. Saida don't believe that this flag was placed, when it was placed in the 90s, intended with the intention of conveying a message of hatred or discrimination. And the people who put it there, when they did, there's no way they could have envisioned the way it was going to be used in the coming decades. So there, I want to be abundantly clear that we aren't placing any blame on them for that happening, or the fact that that is a message that is often conveyed when people see that. I would also like to, on the note of Mr. Gadsden, I'd like to clarify that he wasn't just a slave owner, he was a slave trader. And the Charleston Wharf in South Carolina was a slave trading site where as much as 40% of enslaved Africans were brought through. And that was, I think that was notable. I would also like to bring forward the petition that I started on March 14th. It's since collected 262 signatures. And that's just from what I could get by putting it on my Southborough and sharing it on social media. I'm sure there's probably people in the town who did not see it or have the ability to sign it that would have if they could. The Gadsden communicates an unintended message of hate and division toward people of color because of its appropriation since the 90s by multiple national extremist groups, not just at the insurrection in January, not even just in the past 5 or 10 years. It's been used pretty widely by hate groups for about 30 years now. And so to most people of my generation, this flag has often been seen as a symbol for hatred and anti-government extremism. So to the younger generations, we don't have that time before it was used as a reference point for what it means. To us, that's what it is. I'd also like to say that I do want to honor our veterans and I want to do it properly. My grandfather served in World War II. I think it is very important to honor our veterans and the work that they did to fight for this country. But I don't believe that the Gadsden as it is today, the message that it sends today conveys what he or any of the veterans in this town or in this country fought for. That's all.
Ms. Deesrow, before I go to Ms. Sayeda, let me just ask you the same question I asked Mr. Kalenda. The question of context. If the various revolutionary flags, including the Don't Tread on Me flag, was displayed with context that explained that exactly, it's actually an interesting point you made, the fact that I hadn't thought of it this way, but there might be a generational divide. But if, for instance, the sort of information that I described that would put the displaying of that flag along with the other revolutionary flags in context, is that something you would support?
I think it is important, but unfortunately, if it is up at the flags on a plaque or something, I worry about people driving through the town, whether they live here or whether they're thinking of living here or they already live in neighboring towns, seeing the flag, the Gadsden, and just immediately thinking of the way it's been used by extremist groups and connecting this town to that and that hatred, because the only way to, I don't think there would be a way to make sure that everyone who passes through the town and just passes through town center would go up and read that context. And so, again, I know that the message of hate and division is not intended and it isn't why it's being flown there, but it's still important to recognize how it affects people, especially people of color in this town and in neighboring towns, and the hate, the feeling of othering that it will cause to those people.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sayeda, do you have,
yes.
you want the opportunity? All right, welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Okay. Oh, great. Hi. Dear Selectmen, my name is Pamela Sayeda and I reside in town at 2 Brookside Road. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to you. I wanted to talk to you today because I'm very concerned that the town is flying, particularly the Gadsden flag, not that there are historic flags, but that in particular Gadsden flag on town property. And I'm one of the hundreds of people who signed the Change.org petition that Ms. Deensrow put together. And I didn't know her or anybody on the Historic Commission before, but I reached out because I was also really concerned about the Gadsden flag as a symbol, serving as a symbol of our town, flying in our town center. I'm asking that you vote to remove the flag display, but most essentially the Gadsden flag, and that we find a more suitable way to honor our town's forefathers and foremothers buried in the historic graveyard, including its veterans. The current flag display, I believe, very strongly, occludes the true nature of the cemetery, which holds the remains of, I've learned from town historian Sally Waters, 1,100 men, women, and children whose lives spanned from the 1600s to 1845. And 95% of those burials are people who are not Revolutionary War veterans. If I am all for acknowledging and celebrating our Revolutionary War history and honoring and commemorating those 62 Revolutionary War veterans. That's not a controversial topic. But I think we should look for another spot and use a more historically appropriate flag than the Gadsden flag. The Gadsden flag was flown in the Southern Theater of War, as was the Culpeper flag. And from Sally Waters, I learned that none of the people who are buried in that graveyard ever served in those theaters, and that what the references that I believe Commander Kalenda or Mr. Kalenda made to the Marines' use of the Gadsden flag, and the history of the Navy using the Gadsden flag. That was actually, I think, called the first Navy Jack, and that's a different flag. It's red and white stripes with a rattlesnake, and it does say, "Don't tread on me." It does have a rattlesnake, but it is an entirely different flag. And if someone saw that flag, there would be no confusion with the messaging that the Gadsden flag now carries. So I think that there are certainly things that could be worked together to put together a historic display that's not controversial, and it seems like a relatively easy fix. There's also the issue that the graveyard is extremely densely buried. Only about a third of the gravestones, only about a third of the bodies interred there, people interred there, are marked with gravestones. So there are places where there are many, many people who are buried in a very small area, and it's unmarked. So there is some concern about flagpole placement. I believe that we have one veteran in the graveyard who served in the Continental Navy, and he's served, I believe, under, I'm not going to try to say it, I'm going to misremember my history, so let me not improvise here, but he served under the first Navy Jack, not the Gadsden flag. So no one in that graveyard served under that flag. So it seems very easy to switch it out. Most important, however, in addition to being historically accurate, most important is the message that we're sending to people who live in this town, who live in surrounding towns, who drive through the town. You know, we've had a number of peace vigils in town with tremendous turnout. There's a lot of upset, most recently about a potential lynching in Hopkinton. Hopefully that's not what happened, but these are very salient and volatile and emotional issues. And I think it's important that we respond to modern times, and that our messaging, our symbols are truly reflections of our values in a way that provides clear messaging. The meaning of the Gadsden flag has changed. It first, became wrapped up in politics a bit with the Tea Party, but the alarming shift that came up, obviously, as has been discussed, is its strong association with extremist groups and with hate messages. And just like other symbols have changed in meaning over time, the Gadsden flag has been redefined by anti-government and white supremacist extremist groups that have co-opted it and who regularly fly it. You know, if you look on the news, you'll regularly see this flag associated with these acts of violence. We most prominently and alarmingly, we obviously saw it at the January 6th insurrection and August 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. The Las Vegas cop killers chose the Gadsden flag and the swastika. They paired the two to cover the bodies of the police officers they murdered in June 2014. Extremist groups Stormfront and Occidental Dissent fly the Gadsden flag as one of their banners. So while I appreciate, the sensitivity of saying that we shouldn't allow it to be co-opted by a misguided few, unfortunately, it's not just a misguided few. It's actually quite a large and prominent and ascendant movement in this country that I think it's important that we recognize that this is no longer an issue of a misguided few. This is an issue that dominates our current events and the American psyche currently. So I just ask that you carefully consider the messaging that we deliver with the flags that we fly. They're potent symbols. I think that people can work together to find historically accurate flags that would be non-controversial, that would celebrate our rich history as a town, and that we can more accurately represent what the old burial ground is. That it's not a military burial ground, it's a civilian burial ground, and its history is far broader than the Revolutionary War, but that doesn't mean that we can't also celebrate our Revolutionary War history. So I just ask that historic sensitivity be brought to it, and I thank you for considering my points.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going in the order that I saw. Mr. Wyshan, you had your hand up. So if we could bring Mr. Wyshan over. And I don't want, Vanessa, I don't want to get it all clogged up. So as people finish, send them back to the attendee room.
Good evening. I just wanted to make sure that Sally.
Michael, hold on for a second.
Oops, sorry.
I'll give you a green light in a second. All right, you have a green light.
I have nothing much more to add to this. I just wanted to make sure that Ms. Waters was heard this evening. Is she in the audience? Obviously, we can't see that from here.
She is.
Okay.
Her hand was up after yours.
Okay, great. She has the entire history of the veterans, and I defer to her. Thank you and good evening.
All right, Mr. Wyshan is gone. Ms. Waters is in. Ms. Waters, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I do want to thank both Mr. Wynot and Mr. Kalender for their service, not only to the country, but also to the town. I know they've both done a lot of work for the town. I also want to assure you that I have a great deal of respect for veterans, and I definitely understand the sacrifices that veterans make and that their families make. I would also mention that like Ms. Braccio, I reached out to a few people that I know who are veterans. Two retired Navy captains, a Navy commander, and an Army colonel, and asked them for their thoughts about the Gadsden flag. And they all certainly recognize its importance historically, but they also recognize that it has changed meaning, unfortunately, and that it probably is a little, probably not a great idea to be flying it on town property. But again, that's going to be your decision. I also have a great deal of reverence for what the men and their families endured to bring about independence. So in the old burial ground, there are 26 unmarked graves that are Revolutionary War veterans. There are 36 marked graves that are Revolutionary War veterans. And just a few statistics, I'm not going to bore you with a ton of them, and I think they're quite amazing. 38 of those men answered the alarm of April 19th, 1775. 7 saw no further service. 14 of them spent 3 months in Cambridge and Dorchester Heights. 18 of them marched to Bennington and were there after the Battle of Saratoga, because there was a group of British that went to try to get Bennington, and they did not. There were about 10 that served either at Ticonderoga or West Point. 4 of Southborough men were fined for refusing to march to New York. And in their defense, I will say they were probably, the ones that I've researched were older. They were either well into their 50s or 60s, which back then probably is a little older than it is today. There are several that served in the Continental Army itself for 3 years. And there was one, David Henry Gardner, who served with John Paul Jones on the Bonhomme Richard. And when it took the Serapis from the British. But not one, and I've done extensive research, not one of them did serve in the Southern Department during the Revolutionary War. So I would like to give a couple of examples of the changing meaning of symbols. One, starting with what has been already well discussed tonight, which is Benjamin Franklin's use of the segmented snake at the Albany Plan of Union in 1754. And the interesting thing is that although he was proposing during the French and Indian War that the colonies would better work together for their common defense, when the delegates to that convention went back to their individual colonies, every single colony rejected the idea of working together. Now, 20 years later, that segmented snake, as you have already heard, is joined together. So the whole idea of and the symbolism had changed, and by then they were willing to accept that. The other story I would like to tell is of Josiah Fay, who was one of the 3 men who died during the Revolution. And I do thank the veterans for putting the plaque there honoring the 3 men, Joseph Fay, Josiah Fay, and Jesse Amston, because they are not buried in the old burial ground. They are buried, 2 of them, somewhere near Valley Forge, where the 2 of them died. And Josiah Fay is buried in New York City, where he died purportedly after being poisoned by a loyalist. But the interesting thing is that in 1756, Josiah Fay led a group of men, a company of men, including about 10 from Southborough, up to the area of Lake George, and they were marching under the British flag. They were fighting for the British to try to capture Crown Point. One of his men, a young man named John Fay from Southborough, was killed and is buried up somewhere up in the wilderness there. So the British flag meant a lot to Josiah Fay in 1756. 10 years later, he is going to reject that flag, and he is going to be fighting for American independence and give his life for it. So I think my main point here is that symbols do definitely change meaning to people. And unfortunately, the Gadsden flag has changed meaning because it has been co-opted by people. But as Ms. Seda said, I think that there are ways to resolve this. I would suggest that we put up the Continental Navy Jack, which does have the "Don't Tread on Me" snake, and which is the symbol, which the patch, which is used on the Navy uniforms today, not the Gadsden flag. It was officially adopted in 2016 for the Navy, although it had been being used before that. And that would be appropriate. We have David Henry Gardner, who served with John Paul Jones, and or we could put up the Serapis flag, again, which was John Paul Jones's flag. We had 18 men that went to Bennington, Vermont. Why not put up the Bennington flag? Why not use Massachusetts's pine tree flag? All these men came from Massachusetts. They did not come from South Carolina. And so I find it hard to understand why we would have to have the South Carolina and the Virginia flags. I would like to see historically appropriate flags being used, historically appropriate to the men who are buried there. And I really urge you, when you do take a vote on this, to please not make it a question about personalities in 2021 Southborough, but about the men who are actually buried at that old burial ground. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Waters, thank you very much. I see one more hand raised, Ms. Deans Rowe. And Rebecca, you are muted. You are no longer
Hi,
muted.
I
Hello,
think
how
I've
are
got
you?
it now. Thank you so much for taking time to hear what I have to say. I'm
There's a
very brief.
there's a
I just wanted to
cap.
talk.
There's a family cap, Rebecca. I just want to let you know that on time. No, seriously, go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the placement of the flags. I think we've covered pretty well the historical relevance of the flags. Thank you to Sally Waters and her hard work and identifying what would be really appropriate for the veterans who are buried there. But the placement is also problematic. As you might know already, the 1938 hurricane damaged numerous markers in the old burial ground, and they were subsequently removed. There are, in fact, a total of 741 unmarked graves in the old burial ground. And members of the Historical Society have researched the results of the ground penetrating radar that happened in the early 2000s. And the current display, unfortunately, is placed over an area where numerous unmarked graves were identified. And I think it goes without saying that it's not respectful or desirable to put the flagpoles in an area where people are buried. And I know that this is absolutely, it was not known and it was not the intention when they were placed there. But knowing what we know now, I think it is appropriate for us to find a different place. And I will concur with the others who spoke also, something more historically accurate to Southborough and to honor the people who are actually buried in that burial ground. And I also want to reiterate that you know, this isn't about not supporting veterans. I think pretty much everyone does. As my daughter noted, my father was a sergeant in World War II, and his father was also in World War I, and a descendant of numerous veterans dating back to the Revolutionary War. I respect their service and I support acknowledging their sacrifice, but I simply ask that the acknowledgement be historically relevant, culturally sensitive, and properly placed within Southborough's most important historic property. Thank you.
All right, Rebecca, thank you. I do not see any more raised hands, and so I am going to close the discussion on this issue. Going once, going twice. All right, for discussion by our board and whatever action we choose to take or not take at our May 10 meeting. Are folks fine with that approach? Okay.
Yep.
All right, and we had a big crowd of attendees tonight. I thank all of you for being here. I particularly thank the folks who weighed in. As I said, I read a lot of history. I learned a lot more about flags and just in the last 10 minutes about Southborough history, and it was very educational and informative. Will definitely help with the decision we have to make. So again, thank you all very much. With that, town meeting preparation. Now, Mark, you hate when I do stuff like this. But do we have to do this tonight? And would it be easier to do it on May 10th? Or do you just want, it just seems to, and I'm fine doing it tonight. I went through the list and there are 21, I think, Board of Selectmen articles. And it just struck me that since there are 5 members of the Board of Selectmen, that just grouping them by 4 groups of 4 and 1 group of 5, and you know, if you get luck of the draw to go first, you have articles 1 through 6, and you know, 7 through 10, 11 through 14, 23 through 28, and 29 through 33. There are a couple of jumps in there. Is that the way it's been done and organized in the past, or has it been done differently?
So I think that's the way it's been done in the past. I think that, and
Lisa's nodding no.
No, I know what, anybody can correct me on this. Yes, that is the way it's been done in the past. The one difference is that you've got one member who's not going to be here, you know, when town meeting actually happens. So assigning them an article to make a motion doesn't help. And then obviously when the new member comes in, I assume that somebody will say, well, you can have these articles. Also in the past, I think that if somebody had a particular interest in making the motion and maybe speaking to that article, then the board would say, yep, you can have that one. The other thing that complicates this, and maybe if you want to push this to the 10th, I'm fine with that. Let me just say my piece and we push it to the 10th. But the other piece is that, and Mr. Semino did not talk about this tonight in his pre-town meeting, as to what he is putting onto a consent list for voting these articles. So this happened last year too. The board assigned all of these motions, and I forget which member it was, but everything that they were making the motion for all got wiped out in the consent list. So, you know, it's yes, let's wait for the 10th.
Well, here's, I'm sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
No, just if I could add, Mark, why I was shaking my head no is typically, since I've been on the board anyway, we go through each article. It's not somebody getting like 6 articles in a row. It is member, 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 member. You go through it that way. And how that typically works with the consent agenda as well is there are articles that everybody gets to stand up and speak, and not just one person or 2 people ending up with a boatload of articles. So again, typically how it's done is, you know, Article 1, Mr. Healy, and you just go down the list and you start all over again. That was why I was shaking my head no.
And it can just be the luck of the draw that because a lot of the selectmen's articles are annual articles. So a lot of those are going to get put on a consent list, and it may be that, you know, there's only 1 or 2 of you that may end up making a couple of motions on articles. So
I will tell you, if I end up drawing the straw that doesn't have to make any motions, I'm not going to be upset about it.
I actually have 2 that I want to talk about, 28 and 29, I think it is, on the speed limit things. But other than that, I'm totally indifferent.
Why don't we do this then? Why don't, if there are, you know, for instance, I should talk about the pilot stuff. If there are articles that, Mark, why don't you do this? Send out your best judgment. And again, if you're wrong on a couple, no big deal. But your best judgment on the ones that are likely to end up on the consent agenda. Send that to us in the next day. Then we will, of the non-consent agenda items, we will send back and identify ones that we would like to be responsible for moving and addressing. And then I understand that the timing is weird with the election and everything like that, but you know, so be it. You know, somebody's going to get elected on May 11th, and they're going to get what's left over. That is the reality of it.
Right. Okay. All right.
Is everybody okay with that? Okay. And Chelsea, the immediate thing that went through my mind is that when Mr. Semino makes the motion for by consent, that I suspect that you will object.
Man, I have a pretty rough reputation.
All right, so item 6C is kicked. And so our last item is number 7, public comment. And we do have some folks who have hung in. but going once, going twice. I move to adjourn.
Second.
Shouldn't we say a fond farewell to Mr. Shea and thank
No,
him?
we're going to
for
see
his
him on the
service?
10th.
Not
We'll see
done
him on
yet.
the 10th? Okay. One more chance, huh?
Look
We're
how
gonna see
happy
him on
he
the
is.
10th. No, you're absolutely right, and we will bid him a well-deserved fond farewell. But we will do.
Fireworks and a cupcake with a candle in it.
So don't
Don't
pull a
exceed the
fast one.
dollar value with that. So I have to, don't get me in trouble with the ethics commission on my last day.
$4.99.
Exactly.
Don't
Marty.
pull it. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lisa.
The 10th might be a nice meeting to meet for the first time all together in the same room.
If we could pull it off, that'd be great.
Yeah, it would be.
I think we've made our preferences felt, and I think it's in very good hands with Ms. Hale and with Jay.
Agreed.
They both sound excited about, and they're looking for ways to push the envelope. So I move to adjourn. Mr. Stivers seconded. We actually have now had discussion. No further discussion. Ms. Braccio.
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski.
Aye.
Mr. Shea.
Aye.
Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
Mr. Healy is aye. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you on Monday.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.